Hello and welcome back. If you're watching this, it means you're in your championship and there aren't many games left. You may or may not have any ads left and you're looking for that one last push over the finish line. So in this video, we'll look at the remaining schedule for this week, who still has something to play for, and who you can maybe add to help you bring home the championship. We're going to get right into it. So we'll start off with the remaining schedule, the worst teams, the teams that you might want to get rid of. So some of these teams have 2 games left. All of these teams have 2 games left, but some of them you're going to want to drop if you need that ad. These are the teams that you can drop from. So after tonight, Coyotes, Panthers, Kings, Rangers, and Senators only have one more game left, and most of those games are all going to be on this very heavy Thursday the 13th. So if you have a ton of roster decisions to make for that Thursday night matchup, the only one here that you may have to think about is the Kings. They do play Anaheim, who's horrendous this year, on minus 126 goal differential. Just to put that into perspective, Boston has a plus 124, so they are historically bad in terms of goal differential this year. So that could be one of those teams that you may hold on to your LA Kings, but the rest of these guys, Coyotes, they play tonight against Seattle. They have Vancouver on Thursday. You have the Panthers. They are still playing for something, but these are 2 difficult matchups against Toronto and against Carolina. Who knows if Carolina will rest some players? Same thing with Toronto. But Toronto's got O'Reilly back. They're going to probably want to work on some things before going into the playoffs. The Rangers have the Sabres tonight. They have Toronto on Thursday, so maybe if you have any questionable Rangers ads, obviously you're going to keep the top guys, but anybody that you could potentially drop there, that's a difficult matchup. They could, rest some players as well, the Rangers. They're pretty much set in that 2-3 matchup. And then the Senators, they play Carolina tonight, so if you're thinking about it and you're wondering if you should drop some of your questionable Senators, this is a very difficult matchup, especially against a very good defensive team, one of the top 5 in the league. They do have this game against Buffalo. Buffalo has a very interesting schedule. We'll get to that in just a second, but they may be tired. They have 4 games in 5 nights, so maybe if you have the top guys, you would obviously hold on to them. Anybody in the top 6, Jake Sanderson would be the one question mark. If you need a defenseman who provides what he does, then maybe you keep him. Can you add anyone on this list? So these are the teams with 2 games. Can you add any 2-game teams? Well, the Islanders have the Caps tonight, and they play this off night Wednesday. So there's only a couple of games on this Wednesday. You can see a couple of them here: Calgary, San Jose, Montreal, the Islanders, and then St. Louis, Dallas. And we'll get to the next one in the next slide. But this is one of those situations where the Islanders had a bad schedule all year, but now things have kind of evened out, and they have 2 games left along with the rest of these teams here. So because of the fact that they play the off nights Monday, Wednesday, you may be able to add somebody from the Islanders. Just keep in mind that they probably won't. I don't know if I would assume that they'll start Sorokin both games, but you don't ever know until you see the lineup come out that day. Maybe if you're thinking about picking up Varlamov or something like that, but they do have something to play for, so they will probably not sit guys, which is something that can't be said for some of the top teams. And then you also have the Flames, same situation, Nashville, and then a really favorable matchup against San Jose on Wednesday, and they have a lot to play for, as we'll see in the next slide. So let's get to it. The remaining schedule, which teams to add from. Obviously, Buffalo is going to be the number 1 ad team this week. They have the second half of the week. They have 4 games in the next 5 days, including a game at the end of the week, this April 14th, all these makeup games, and this is the best matchup on that day. So playing against one of the worst teams in the league, one of the worst defensive teams in the league, who has basically a minor league roster at this point, that would be the best chance that you would have to add offense for the final day of the season for fantasy. They do have a very difficult Monday, Tuesday back-to-back in New York and then in New Jersey. Both of those games are going to be critical for Buffalo. Buffalo has to win out, basically, to have any shot at making the playoffs. And we will get to that in just a second because we're going to touch on Buffalo ads that you can get in the next slide. So Buffalo is the obvious team to add from if you can fit them in. If you can't, because in most of these games on the 13th, if you have any questionable guys that you're picking up from Buffalo, they might not get in on this day, but you're still going to get at least 1 or 2 games out of these guys, if not more than that. But then obviously the other teams that we talked about a number of times, Nashville, Colorado, Columbus, all those teams play on that Friday, and a couple of them have pretty good schedules. Obviously, Colorado is probably owned up. Anybody who was thinking about picking up Rodriguez or Comfer or anybody like that has probably done so already. You might not be able to get anybody from them. Nashville's a different story, and we'll get to that in just a second. And they play tonight, and then they have the back-to-back in Minnesota. At home against Minnesota and at home against Colorado. So that is something that you could potentially add some players from because they're playing at least 2 off nights. Dallas, they have a decent schedule, as you can see. Detroit tonight, away in Detroit, and then a home and home with St. Louis. This is that Wednesday night game, so they are going to play at least 2 off nights. And if you had to, you can maybe play them these 2 games, drop them, and then try to pick somebody up for this Friday game if you have the ads left. Now, the reason San Jose is kind of colored differently is because they do play Monday, Wednesday. Those are 2 kind of lighter nights, especially the Wednesday. But these are not easy matchups, and both of these teams have something to play for. So Winnipeg and Calgary are fighting for the wild card spot. These are teams that are going to have to play all their top players, and San Jose has been really bad over the past couple of weeks. They've been picking it up a little bit after that 9-game winless streak. And then they have the road back-to-back in Calgary and in Edmonton. So I don't like any of those matchups. If you have Carlson, you obviously keep him. Maybe you keep Tomas Hertl. Maybe there's 1 or 2 other guys you could look at. If you're looking for just that spot start on the Wednesday, there's a couple of guys that you could maybe own. But other than that, it's really not the best matchup. So who is motivated to play at this point in the season? Because you're probably going to have some guys that are being sat. I've had it. It's been decimating my team, especially my face-off league. Bergeron is the 2nd best player in the league, and he hasn't played for a lot of the last week. So it's been destroying me, and I probably will lose that matchup because of the fact that some of these teams are resting their top guys. I also lost Eriksson Ek, so that's a tough blow. But these are the teams that have something to play for. Florida, Pittsburgh, the Islanders, Buffalo. Those are all the wild card teams fighting to get into the playoffs right now. They're not going to be resting players. They're going to be playing their top guys 20 to 25 minutes a game or more. Ekblad was up close to 28 minutes last game for Florida. Pittsburgh, Tristan Jarry has hit some waiver wires. They're probably going to have to ride him from now on to try to get into the playoffs. Islanders, I would imagine Sorokin gets those 2 starts. Buffalo, we will get to in just a second. In the West, Winnipeg, Calgary, and Nashville still has a chance. Despite the fact that they are decimated by injuries, they basically have an AHL roster at this point, at least up front, with some of those guys that you've noticed, up in the lineup: Evangelista, Tomasino, Tommy Novak, etc. Some of those guys are available on the waiver wire, and we will get to that in just a second. But let's start with the best schedule remaining, and that is Buffalo. Now, this depends on what you need. So the Buffalo Sabres, they have 78 games played. They have 85 points. So right now, Florida has 80 games, 91 points. Same with the Islanders, 80 games, 91 points. Pittsburgh, 80 games, 90 points. So Buffalo needs to win out. They need 4 wins in their next 5 days. And then on top of that, they need some help. They need Florida and the Islanders to lose 1 of 2 and Pittsburgh to lose at least 1 of 2. But if Buffalo doesn't win out, they're facing an uphill battle and they need a lot of help to get in, but they still have something to play for, which means you need to own these guys, especially with 4 games in the next 5 days. So if you're in a shallower league, Dylan Cousins is the number 1 ad, 5 points in his last 3 games, 2 power play points, second line minutes, getting some power play time, obviously. He would be one of the best ads that you can find. If you can't get him, Casey Middlestat is relatively hot. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in his last 3 games, 9% owned. But both of these guys are single position centers, so they might not get in on this game against Ottawa, which is that Thursday night where everybody's playing. So unless you have some open roster spots because guys are resting players, then maybe you have to think about getting somebody with some positional flexibility. But other than that, on defense, Owen Power, 52% owned, 4 assists, a power play point in his last 3 games. If you just need hits and blocks, Matthias Samuelsson, now healthy, back in the lineup, only 2% owned, 11 hits, 7 blocks in his last 3 games. And you can see over here, this is the player rankings. This is sorted by change. So Yoki Haru had a pretty decent week. Jordan Greenway, 3 goals in his last 5 games. He's been climbing a little bit. Here you see Middlestat. Girgensons, not really much to go off of there. He's not really that highly rated. Owen Power climbing up there. Dahlin still doing what he does. You could always go to Golofsson for goals and potential power play goals at that. Cousins, as you can see here, trending in the right direction. Alex Tuck is still an own. Jeff Skinner hasn't really moved at all, but he's one of those guys that gets you a ton of shot volume. So these are some options for you. Jack Quinn would be the other one. He's been relatively quiet lately, but sometimes that means they're going to break out, and they need him to break out right now. He's a very good goal scorer who can shoot the puck, and if there's any time in the season where they need him to score some goals, it's now. So because of the fact that he's relatively low ownership, he should be playing second line minutes. He would become an add despite the fact that he hasn't produced a lot in the last week or so. But the big concern here with Buffalo is goaltending. Who's going to start? They have 4 games. They have 2 back-to-backs. They can't use one goalie all week, so they have to play somebody else. You can see here Devin Levi has gotten 3 wins in his 4 starts in the NHL. 904 save percentage, 3.17 goals against. UPL, 6K, whatever you want to call them. 929 save percentage, 3 goals against average, 1 win in 1 start in the last 2 weeks. Eric Comrie, 927, 278 goals against, and he didn't get the win in his 1 start. So it'll be interesting to see who they play in these other back-to-back games. I would imagine Levi gets 2 starts. I would imagine one of these guys gets at least 1 start, and maybe they'll get 1 start to each, especially if they're out of the playoffs after the first 2, after the first back-to-back. If they're out of it, maybe they give 1 start to UPL and 1 start to Comrie. Just something to monitor on the day of to see if you need a goaltending start. Who are they playing? This game right here, this matchup against Columbus, even though they might be out of the playoffs, that could be huge if you need a goaltending win on the last day of the season. So keep an eye on the goalie starters for Buffalo because they're going to need to use more than 1 goalie this week. But there's one other team that you might want to add from, and that is Nashville. So Nashville is one of the better schedules. They play tonight against at Calgary, and then 2 home games back-to-back, Minnesota and Colorado. Those are difficult matchups. You don't know if those guys are going to be rested, if they're going to be, McKinnon maybe doesn't get in, maybe Rantanen doesn't get in. Who knows? But Makar is out. That is a little bit better news if you want to own Nashville players. But the reason why we're featuring him, all these guys here, is because a lot of them are ownable. Tommy Novak, the best player on Nashville right now, 3 goals, 4 assists, 4 power play points, 10 shots, and even 7 blocks in his last 7 games. He's been really hot since he came into the league. Cody Glass has a little bit more positional flexibility, center and right wing eligible. So on this very heavy Thursday, you might be able to get Glass in a little bit easier than Tommy Novak. But with that said, 3 goals, 2 assists, 3 power play points, 16 shots in his last 7 games. So a little bit more shot volume out of Cody Glass. You also have a hits and shots option in Kiefer Sherwood, 3% owned, single position right winger, getting some power play time, 13 shots, 24 hits in his last 7 games. That's incredible hit volume, over 3 hits per game. And then the shot volume is pretty decent as well, with almost 2 shots per game in that span. And then you also have Luke Evangelista, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points in his last 7, a power play point. But the reason these guys are featured is they do get some power play time. But a couple of other things that you could go for. So if you need hits, just hits, Kiefer Sherwood is a good guy to go for. Dante Fabro and Michael McCarron has actually been hitting a decent amount over the past 2 weeks. For shots, you're looking at Yakov Trenin, Cody Glass, Evangelista, and Kiefer Sherwood. For blocks, you're looking at Gravel, Fabro, and McDonough. Now, Fabro showed up in the hits and blocks, so if you need a guy for both, that would be the guy to go for, Dante Fabro. You can see here he's been improving over the last couple of weeks here, 1.44 change interval. McDonough is mainly a blocks defenseman at this point, and Gravel doesn't have a huge track record, which is why he's all the way down here, but he's been improving over the last little bit. McCarron started to play better now that he's back out of the player assistance program, I believe that was, and he's a big body who likes to get to the front of the net, likes to throw his weight around, so if you need that, he's been relatively productive in terms of hits. So just a couple of options for you guys there. But this is going to do it for this section. Now let's turn to the next part of this video, where we're going to look at some of the guys that you can add that are a little bit lower ownership, typically what we do on a Monday, but it's going to be a little bit different format. Just going to quickly run through some of the top players over the past week. Jordan Eberle, 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points in 4 games, 3 of those on the power play. Somebody asked me about Eberle versus Sprong. Sprong had a decent week himself, but Eberle came out of nowhere and did this. So if you grabbed Eberle before this week, because they did have a ton of volume this week, 23% owned, and he did a lot of work for you to help you win your championship. Jared McCann was another guy, 8 points in 4 games, 17 shots, so that's huge. Obviously, the top dogs getting it done. McKinnon, Rantanen, 10 points in 4 games. Pasternak maybe saving my season yesterday with the hat trick, with an assist, with 10 shots on goal on Sunday, so that was massive for me personally. As you look down this list, Yanni Gourde, 13% owned, 3 points in 4 games, but he's getting a little bit of everything. So 9 shots, 8 hits, 6 blocks, 2 power play points, doing everything for you in terms of category coverage. Dante Fabro, as I mentioned, the hits and blocks coming in handy this week with a massive 7-game week, I believe it was. And then you keep going down here. You have Rasmus Ristolainen, mainly for shots, hits, and blocks. You can see 13 shots, 13 hits, 7 blocks. Not a lot of offensive production. Every now and then he does get some offensive production, but I don't necessarily recommend him as an ad, as the Flyers are probably out of it right now. Some of these other guys are mainly owned up. Carson Soucy, you're looking at mainly a blocks defenseman, but he did get some offensive production last week. As we turn to the next page, here's Daniel Sprong, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points in 4 games, 3 on the power play, and that's where he's making most of his money. You can see the ice time, 13:25, because he's on that 4th line, but getting that power play time is helping his offensive production. So if you want to go and add Sprong, dual position eligibility, he plays tonight in Arizona, and Seattle has a really good road record, 25 wins on the road this year, so they might be the one team that could actually keep up with Arizona on home ice. Some of these other guys, Matheson, 43% owned, 4 assists, 10 shots, and 11 blocks, no hits. It's a really weird file to see somebody with that many blocks and no hits, but getting some shots, getting some assists, that's been a little bit helpful for me. As you can see, I own him here. Down the list here, 62% Adam Larson, mainly hits and blocks, getting 13 hits, 7 blocks, 4 shots, a goal, and an assist. 62% owned, so he may or may not be there for you. Wade Allison, he's relatively productive when he's out there, but as Tortorella reminded everybody that he's just never in the lineup, but he is right now. He had a goal in 4 games, but you're looking at shot volume and hits out of Allison, so he's been getting a little bit more of the peripheral coverage than offensive production lately. Tyler Bertuzzi, when they're resting players in Boston, Bertuzzi is an ad because he's elevated in the top 6 and he's playing power play time. 5 assists, a power play point, not a lot of shots, getting a couple of hits, but the main reason you would own him is because he's getting an elevated role when they sit guys like Bergeron and Krejci, etc. I really hope they don't sit Pasternak because he's having an incredible season and I desperately need him this week. But if they do, Bertuzzi could be one of those guys that slots in and gets an elevated role. They're probably not going to rest him going forward. Some of these other guys, 18% Ryan Graves. He had a nice offensive week. I wouldn't necessarily count on that. You're mainly looking at him for shots and blocks. He's been a really decent blocks guy all season long. Some of these other guys, Jack Johnson, I wouldn't really touch. Eric Johnson, I wouldn't really touch. But because of the fact that Makar's out, they've been getting an elevated role. And you can see 11 hits for Eric Johnson with some blocks and shots as well. Same thing for Jack Johnson and some elevated ice time for them. But now let's turn to the goaltending because this might be something that you need to help you win your week. And there may be some interesting names that we see pop up that you could potentially go to. Alex Lyon, 6 games, I believe 6 or 7 in a row that he's won. He's going for his 7th, I believe, tonight. 959 save percentage last week, 3 wins in 3 games, 167 goals against. He's only 24% owned, so he might be there for you. And again, Florida needs to win these games, so they're going to have to play Ekblad 28 minutes. They're going to have to play all their top guys, and they're going to have to go for it. They're not sitting players, so that's somebody that you could go to for a goaltending start. Some of these other guys, Philip Grubauer, we've talked about this for a number of weeks now. I believe Martin Jones was pulled the other night, so Grubauer is the guy I would go to in this situation in Arizona. If you're just looking for wins, if you're in a points league and you need the wins, Grubauer would be the best bet there because typically his stats have not been great. This past week, not bad at all. 2 wins in 3 games, 951 save percentage, 129 goals against. That looks more like Grubauer that we saw a couple of years ago. Moving down the list, Jack Campbell, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole for anything other than wins. He did get me a big win in one of my leagues this past week, as you can see here, 964 and 1 goal against. I believe that was against Anaheim. So one of those teams where you get that favorable matchup. If he plays against San Jose on the 13th. That would be a decent spot to start him in. Going down the list a little bit here, Lankinen is probably going to have to play one of these back-to-back games, I would imagine. If they're still in a playoff race, maybe he doesn't get the start. Maybe they start Saros for all three of these games, but if they're not, Lankinen will probably get one of those starts. It's just probably not going to be a win considering the opponents that they're playing. As we move down the list a little bit here, Joseph Woll, I don't know what they're going to do in terms of the backup. Obviously, they had Jet Alexander play half a minute and a half, whatever it was. Joseph Woll could be an option if they're going to try to just punt and go for resting players the way, from here on in. But that could be an interesting play just because they're a very good defensive team. He got into a game, got a win, 923 save percentage, 2 goals against. Mackenzie Blackwood might actually play again. So Lindy Ruff was talking about getting into some games with Blackwood. He did get a start against Boston, didn't get the win, but looked really good, 38 saves on 40 shots. So he might get one of these games down the stretch if they're trying to rest Vanacek. So that could be a guy that you look for. Stalock's going tonight. I don't like that matchup at all, but he has been pretty good in different sections of the season with a 929 save percentage last week despite not getting the win. Jonathan Quick, this would be another guy. I think they only have 2 games this week, but he probably will get one of them, and they are a very good defensive team. It's just a matter of, are they resting guys? Eichel's been out because maybe rest, maybe banged up a little bit, but that could be a good spot start for you. Moving on to the second page, there's a couple of guys that you could get. Here's Jet Graves. He was up for a little bit, and if you ever see a player get called up and he's potentially going to get a start, that's a very risky move, but if you need it, and if it's a good team, Columbus is not, but if it is, that could be a way to go. Speaking of, if Carolina wants to give one of these guys a rest and call up Kochetkov, that could be a really nice start if he gets called up. Jones is day-to-day, hence why you're going to want Grubauer there. Some of these other guys, Charlie Lindgren may or may not get a start. He's not starting today, so he would potentially get a start against Boston tomorrow or maybe Jersey. I would assume that he would get the start tomorrow against Boston, so that could be a very difficult matchup, but if Boston's resting a bunch of players, that would be an interesting spot start as well. Levi, you have here, we covered him before, 10% owned. Again, he's not putting up the best save percentage, but he's getting wins for Buffalo, and that's what they need right now. Francouz is an interesting play as well, 33% owned, and he might play this game against Nashville on the 14th, or he could play this game against Winnipeg. But the point here is they have a back-to-back to end the season. They're probably not going to want Georgiev to play both, I would imagine. So he'll get one more start. I picked him up for that Sunday game. I'm holding on to him in case he gets another start because of that. And it would likely be a win, you would have to think, because Colorado's ramping up for the playoffs. Some of these other guys, Halak may or may not get a start. He's not starting tonight. But they play Toronto on the 13th. If they want to rest Shesterkin before the playoffs, they'll give Halak the start. That would be an interesting spot start for Halak. A couple of these other guys, Dostal, he's been getting shelled just like all of the Anaheim goaltenders. If you need just save volume, it's 41 saves last night. He actually put up better numbers than Francouz in that game for some league formats because of the save volume. Just something to keep an eye on there. Sogard is going tonight against Carolina. I don't like the matchup, but if you need a goaltending start, Sogard has had games stretches here where he was really good, 9-4-3, 9-3-1, 9-4-1, but then falls off a little bit towards the end. But these are just some of the options you have to go off of for goaltending starts. Hopefully, I covered enough that you can potentially get some ideas off of that. But now let's very quickly turn to the Player Hub and look at some of the top risers from last week. So now we're at the Hub. Some of these guys are not really ownable. Matt Luff, Alex Nylander, some of these guys in red, you're not really going to want to own, especially if your championship depends on it. And that's why their change interval is so high, because they haven't played a ton of games. But it's interesting to see Gus Nyquist here, 9.03 change interval. So he's been getting it done lately. Last game, 2 assists, 1 on the power play after coming back from injury, 11 minutes of ice time, so it's maybe not the best file. But again, Columbus does play on the last day of the season. This could be one of those ads that you pick up for that matchup against Buffalo. Buffalo may be out of it. They may be resting players. They may be throwing in somebody in net that maybe isn't the best goaltender, despite the fact that they have 4 pretty good options. But Gus Nyquist improving last week. Morgan Geekie, improving as well. Jacob Peterson climbing up the chart here. Of these guys, you're going to want the guys in the 60s or above. Lucas Reichel, this is a Chicago play. Some of those guys are really not ownable just because of the plus minus. If you have that in your league, they're not ownable. But Ryan O'Reilly's back. He might have hit the waiver wire in some of your leagues. They only have 2 games this week, I believe. And some of them are difficult matchups. They do have a game against the Rangers, but they're going to want to play O'Reilly and get him back into the mix, get him going before the playoffs. So that could be a nice little add. Yanni Gourde, we mentioned earlier, he's one of those players in that range of ownability, 67, and he's been climbing up the rankings here. Jordan Eberle, with that week he had last week, he's been climbing as well. Tyler Bertuzzi, same type of thing. Let's filter by points per game percentile and try to get somebody who's at least ownable, top 50th percentile or so, something a little bit to filter out a lot of these red guys over here. So as you move down the list a little bit, Ekblad's been playing a lot better since I've dropped him, 7-game point streak. So you're welcome if you own Aaron Ekblad. That was because I dropped him. Adrian Kempe, this was another interesting play. Again, they're playing Vancouver tonight. That is a very difficult matchup for LA. They don't score a ton of goals against Vancouver, and Demko is playing really well. But that is a nice file to own because of the shot volume at the very least and the top 6 exposure. Casey Middlestat we touched on a little bit. Daniel Sprong we touched on a little bit. Kotkaniemi, they have 2 games going forward, and he might get an elevated role if they start to rest players. That could be interesting to look at. Jared McCann, if he's available, he's always an own, in my opinion, as one of the top goal scorers for Seattle. He, I believe, is chasing down 40 at the moment. I don't know if he'll get there or not, but that would be really interesting to see as he's been kind of bouncing around the league. Pittsburgh had him, and they left him unprotected for the expansion draft, and he's been on fire recently. 4 goals, 4 assists in his last 4 games, a ton of shot volume on top of all that. So really excellent season for Jared McCann all the way through, and this is something that I've been talking about for a while with McCann. I'm trying to pull up his total stats, but I can't find them for whatever reason, but he is a really good goal scorer. If he's available, I would definitely go and pick him up, especially if you can get him for tonight. Some of these other guys, Alex Pietrangelo, when I last checked, he had 14 shots in the first 3 games of the week this week, which is terrible for me because I'm playing against him. But Pietrangelo, he's one of the power play guys in Vegas. He's been an absolute shot volume monster this week. A 9-shot game, a 5-shot game, a 4-shot game. So really excellent stuff from Pietrangelo. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully I helped you out a little bit. I know this went long, but you can skip ahead and find what you need. But if you got any help from this over the course of the season, I want to thank you all for watching. This has been an incredible experience, going from 0 to 2,200 subscribers in just the last couple of months from the beginning of the season till now. So I want to thank you all for watching the channel, watching the videos, and sticking through, following on Instagram, etc. Thank you all for all of that. It's meant a lot to me, and it's been helping me stay afloat as I look for a job currently. So thank you all for doing that. Hopefully I will see you in an upcoming video. I'm going to be doing a couple of analyses on some of the trends that we're seeing, guys like Erik Karlsson having incredible seasons. So stay tuned for that. But thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.